It started like any other day, crisp autumn air, the kind that nips at your skin just enough to keep you moving. I wasn't planning to find the farm. Hell, I didn't even know it existed. I was out for a drive, letting the road take me wherever it felt like leading. There was something about the rural backroads that had always calmed me, a sense of isolation that cleared my mind. Today, though, that feeling would shift into something else entirely. The first sign came from the cracked wooden post jutting out of the earth, half hidden beneath the tangled overgrowth. It looked like it had been there forever, forgotten like most things out here. But something about it caught my eye, a name faintly etched into the rotting wood, Hollow's End. Curiosity nudged me to stop. The road had been silent for miles, no sign of life save for the occasional bird cawing overhead. Pulling over, I stepped out, the gravel crunching underfoot as I approached the weathered sign. Beyond it, an overgrown path wound deeper into the trees, almost suffocated by creeping vines and thorny brush. Where does that lead? I whispered to myself. I don't know what made me push forward, but my feet carried me without hesitation, as if something deeper than curiosity was pulling me in. The air grew thick as I walked, the faint smell of rot and decay brushing past my nostrils. It wasn't overpowering, but it lingered, uncomfortable like an old memory surfacing. The path twisted and turned, narrowing until it felt like the trees themselves were closing in on me. After what felt like an eternity, I broke through the dense foliage and there it was. A farm. But not just any farm. This one was ancient, untouched by time, or perhaps consumed by it. The farmhouse stood crooked, its roof sagging like it could collapse any second. The barn nearby wasn't in any better shape, its red paint faded to a sickly brown. Rusted equipment lay strewn across the yard, half buried in the tall, dry grass. But it was the silence that struck me the hardest. Not a single sound. No wind, no birds. Nothing. I hesitated before stepping further. Something felt wrong, like I had crossed a boundary that wasn't meant to be disturbed. The silence snapped. In the distance, a faint movement caught my eye, by the barn in the shadows. It looked like an animal, but it was hard to make out. Curious and unnerved, I took a few steps closer. That's when the stench hit me, sour, thick, and putrid like something had been rotting in the sun for days. I swallowed hard, feeling my stomach churn. The air here was different, heavy with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the smell, it was the oppressive stillness, the way the world seemed to hold its breath around this place. My feet dragged me closer, though every instinct screamed to turn back. I reached the edge of the barn, the wood brittle beneath my hand as I leaned against it. The boards creaked under the pressure as if they might give way at any moment. With a deep breath, I peered inside, squinting to adjust to the dim light within. And then I saw it. Piled in the far corner, half covered in hay and dirt, were the bodies. At first, I thought they were old farm animals, long dead, but as I stepped closer, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just dead. They had been arranged, carefully, almost ritualistically. Cows, sheep, and goats, all with their eyes still open, wide and unseeing, their bodies twisted in unnatural positions. My mouth went dry as I forced myself to look away. What kind of place was this? Who would do something like that? The rustling sound came again, louder this time, but it wasn't coming from the corner. It was coming from the loft above me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I tilted my head upwards, squinting into the shadows. Something moved. I couldn't see it clearly, just a dark shape shifting slightly, almost as if it was watching me. My pulse quickened as my body screamed at me to run. But I couldn't. Not yet. Swallowing the rising bile in my throat, I stepped back, slowly retreating from the barn. The air outside was no better, thick with that awful, cloying stench. I scanned the property, the shadows stretching long across the ground, hiding secrets I didn't want to uncover. And then I saw it, a trail leading from the barn deeper into the woods. At first, it seemed like an ordinary path, but there was something about the way the grass was flattened, something about the dark stains along the way. I couldn't leave. Not now. With one last glance at the barn, I followed the trail. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I approached the house. Every step forward more difficult than the last. The rotting boards creaked under my boots, their groans a warning that I refused to heed. My eyes remained fixed on the house's broken windows, each one a dark, yawning maw, staring out at me like hollow eyes of a long-dead thing. The front door was barely hanging on its hinges, the wood cracked and warped, barely recognizable beneath the thick layers of dirt and grime. It looked like no one had stepped foot inside for decades, maybe longer. And yet, as I drew closer, a cold gust of wind swept past me, rattling the broken shutters and sending a shiver straight down my spine. The stench of rot clung to everything here, thicker by the house like the ground itself was soaked with decay. Still, I forced myself forward. Something about this place, this whole farm, gnawed at my gut. It felt ancient, malevolent, like it was waiting for something, or someone. I reached the door and hesitated, my hand hovering just above the rusted doorknob. For a moment, I could have sworn I heard faint whispers coming from inside, soft, indistinct murmurs, like voices trapped just behind the walls. My fingers brushed the cold metal and the whispers stopped. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The hinges screamed in protest, but it gave way easily, swinging open to reveal the interior of the house. Darkness swallowed everything beyond the doorway, thick and impenetrable. I stepped inside, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, each beat echoing in the eerie silence. The floor beneath me felt unstable, as though it could give out at any moment, but I pressed on. The staleness of the air was suffocating, thick with dust and that ever-present scent of rot. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the cracked windows, I began to make out the details of the room. It was a living room, or at least it had been long ago. The remnants of a couch, its cushions torn and spilling their stuffing, sat in one corner, and a broken coffee table lay on its side in front of it. Faded floral wallpaper clung desperately to the walls, peeling in long strips like the skin of something long dead. But it was the photographs that caught my eye. They were scattered across the floor, some still hanging crookedly on the walls, their frames broken or covered in a layer of dust so thick it was hard to make out the faces. I bent down to pick one up, brushing away the dirt with my sleeve. The image that stared back at me was unsettling, to say the least. A family, a mother, father, and 2 children, stood in front of the very house I was now standing in. They were all smiling, but the smiles were wrong, too wide, too forced. And their eyes were completely black, voids where their pupils should have been. I dropped the photo, my heart lurching in my chest. What the hell had happened here? My gaze drifted across the room, landing on the stairwell leading up to the 2nd floor. The banister was rotted, chunks of it missing, and the steps looked like they might collapse under the slightest weight, but I knew I had to go up. Something was waiting up there. I could feel it. I started up the stairs, each creak and groan of the wood making my pulse quicken. The further I ascended, the colder it became, like all the warmth had been sucked from the air. By the time I reached the landing, I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The upstairs hallway was long and narrow, the doors to the rooms on either side all closed, except for one at the far end. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling out from within. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to walk toward it, each step louder than the last in the suffocating silence. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a small bedroom. The bed, covered in a filthy, threadbare quilt, sat beneath a single window. The floor was littered with more photographs, all of them turned face down. My stomach tightened as I knelt down to pick one up. It was another family photo. But this one was different. The faces were blurred, smeared, as if someone had taken their hand and dragged it across the image, distorting their features into grotesque shapes. I dropped the photo with a gasp, my heart pounding in my chest. And that's when I felt it, the weight of another presence in the room. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up as the temperature dropped even further. Slowly I turned my head, my breath coming in shallow, rapid bursts. At first I saw nothing. The room was empty. But then, in the far corner, the shadows began to move. A figure emerged, so faint at first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But it became clearer, more solid with each passing second. A woman. She was dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothing, her hair hanging in long, tangled strands over her face. Her head was slightly cocked to one side as if broken at the neck, and her eyes, God, her eyes, were nothing but hollow black pits, darker than anything I had ever seen. I stumbled backward, my body trembling uncontrollably, but she didn't move. She just stood there watching me with those void-like eyes. The silence pressed in on me so thick it felt like I was suffocating. My mind screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my body wouldn't respond. Then, without a sound, she began to drift toward me. Her feet never touched the ground, she simply glided, her movements slow and deliberate. My back hit the wall and I felt the cold, rough texture of the wallpaper against my skin. I was trapped. The woman stopped just inches from me, her face so close I could feel the cold radiating off of her. Her mouth opened but no sound came out, just a void, a black hole where her voice should have been. And then, suddenly the room began to spin. I felt the walls closing in, the air being sucked out of my lungs. I gasped for breath, but it was useless. She was taking something from me. I could feel it. My strength, my will, my very existence was being drained. I could see my reflection in her eyes now, warped, distorted, as if I was being pulled into her. My body began to feel light, weightless, like I was slipping away from the world, from myself. And then she whispered, her voice soft and cold, like a breeze brushing across my skin, "You belong here now." With those words, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the ground outside the house. The sky was dark and the air was thick with the smell of rot. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. The house loomed above me, silent and still, but something was different. I tried to move, to walk away, but I couldn't. My legs refused to carry me beyond the boundaries of the property. It was as if I was tethered to the land, to the house itself. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't leave. And that's when I realized the terrible truth. I was trapped. Forever. There would be no escape from Hollow's End. The ghost had taken me, just like she had taken all the others before me. And now, I would be just another part of the forgotten farm.